As anyone who watches true crime or legal shows will tell you, the court can be a dramatic place. From tense cross-examinations to shocking revelations and even outbursts, a lot can happen in a courtroom. But there's nothing as dramatic as someone being murdered in court. Yes, murdered. As eerie as it sounds, it has happened several times in the past. What did these people do to deserve this fate? Find out as we take you through the 5 convicts who were killed in court. Klaus Grabowski. Before he met his end in a courtroom, Klaus Grabowski already had a long and storied history as someone who harmed children, especially little girls. He lived in Germany all of his life and was known to law enforcement as a serial abuser. In 1973, he was arrested for strangling a 6-year-old girl, but shockingly enough, he only received probation for this. Now you'd think someone who escaped jail the first time would be on better behavior, but this was not the case with Grabowski. Instead, only a few years later, he was again arrested for harming children, and the victims were only 9 years old. Yes, you heard that right. It wasn't one child he harmed, but 2. And while Grabowski might have gotten a fairly light treatment from the court initially, this time, it wasn't going to be so easy. He was facing jail time, but chose to undergo chemical castration so he wouldn't be able to hurt any more children. By choosing to do this, he was able to escape jail time, and all seemed well, but it wasn't. Unknown to everyone, Grabowski was secretly taking medication to reverse the effects of the chemical castration. So not only was he not in jail, but he was also still interested and capable of hurting kids. To make things worse, he was about to commit perhaps his most gruesome crime that would lead to one of the most infamous courtroom showdowns of all time. Now, the woman at the center of this whole affair was Marin Bachmeier. Born on June 3, 1950, Marin had a very rough life in West Germany, with a violent father who drank a lot and a mother who kicked her out of the house when she was just a teenager. At just 16, she gave birth to her first child, who she had to give up for adoption. She conceived a second child at 18, and after being assaulted shortly before she gave birth, gave that child up for adoption as well. Then, on November 14, 1972, she gave birth to her third and last child, a little girl called Anna Bachmeier. She was 23, and the father wasn't involved in her and her child's life, so she raised Anna alone. She worked as a waitress to provide for Anna, but things still weren't very stable. Her job at the bar kept her away for long hours, and some friends say that Marianne treated Anna more like an adult than a kid. Anna did a lot of looking after herself and sometimes slept at the bar her mother worked at. Sadly, things were about to get much worse. It all started on the morning of May 5, 1980, when the mother and daughter had a fight right before Anna was supposed to go to school. As you'd imagine, the 7-year-old was really upset and decided that she didn't want to go to school that day. Just as she left, pretending to go to school, a neighbor in their apartment complex offered to let her stay in his apartment and play with his cats. This neighbor was none other than Klaus Grabowski. Once Anna was in Grabowski's apartment, he assaulted her for hours, and if that wasn't bad enough, he strangled her with his fiancé's tights. At just 7 years old, her life had come to a gruesome and violent end. But Grabowski wasn't done. He tied Anna up and put her body in a box. Because he worked as a butcher, he had experience in packing up bodies and was now using these skills to cover up his horrific acts. Once Anna was in the box, he went to the shore of the local canal, buried the box in a shallow grave, and went home. One relief in this whole story is that Grabowski didn't get away with it. Remember that he strangled Anna with his fiancé's tights? Well, when his fiancée got home, she realized what he had done and immediately called the police. Once authorities arrived at the canal shore, they found Anna's body and immediately arrested Grabowski. As I've said, he was already known as someone who preyed on children, but this was another level of criminal. He was charged with abduction, assault, and murder. These sorts of allegations could attract many years in prison, but as history would tell us, Grabowski would not live long enough to be sentenced. The trial began on March 3, 1981, and Grabowski immediately began trying to place blame on the girl that he murdered. He claims that the 7-year-old tried to seduce him, and that after the attack, she demanded money from him and threatened to tell her mother if he didn't give it to her. Grabowski claimed that he then killed her to avoid being extorted. As anyone would imagine, this did not go down well with Marianne. This man had assaulted and murdered her daughter, and was now blaming the child for the entire situation. So, she decided to take matters into her own hands. On March 6, 1981, she came into the courtroom for what looked like a normal hearing. But what others didn't know was that Marianne had a .22 caliber Beretta 70 pistol in her coat. Once she spotted Grabowski, her plan went into action. She took out her gun and fired at him 7 times. 6 of the shots hit him, and he died pretty much instantly. When you watch the clip of the shooting, you might notice that Marianne is basically emotionless as she shoots him. Even when others come in to stop her, her face barely changes. She was a woman on a mission. Marianne also showed zero remorse for killing Grabowski, and in her official statement, she wrote, "I did it for you, Anna," with 7 hearts for the 7 years her daughter lived. Marianne was eventually convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 6 years in prison, but only served 3. She died of pancreatic cancer in 1996 and is buried buried beside her daughter. As for Grabowski, he has gone down in history not just as a horrific child abuser, but as a man who got taken out in court by a passionate mother. Siale Angelo. Now don't get me wrong, a criminal being killed in court is crazy enough, but imagine a criminal being killed in court because they were trying to attack someone while standing trial for violent crimes already. The thing is, you don't have to imagine it, as this is exactly what happened to Siale Angelo. So, a bit of background about Angelo. Not a lot is known about his early life, but we do know that he was a member of the Tongan Crips gang. This gang is quite prolific in its activities. It's made up mostly of people from the Pacific Islands and operates in several U.S. states, as well as New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. With that much of an international presence, you can bet the gang has a long rap sheet. Among other terrible things, it's been linked to selling drugs, kidnapping, bank fraud, extortion, and arson. Given that Angelo was involved with the gang, he probably took part in some of these, not-so-legal activities. What led him to the courtroom where he eventually met his death was a 29-count racketeering indictment of 17 people involved in the gang, which included the then 25-year-old. Racketeering basically means organized crime, and according to the press, the gang had been engaged in assault, weapons, and robbery. He had also pled guilty to obstruction of justice and failure to stop at the command of police back in 2007 and was serving 15 years in prison. Then, in 2014, he and his fellow gang members were indicted on their charges. The interesting thing about this case is that the only reason Angelo even died was because A, he was being tried in a new courthouse that only opened the week before, and B, there wasn't the best communication between the judge and the marshals assigned to his hearing. At least that's what the FBI says. You see, convicts appearing in court are usually shackled, so they don't, try to attack anyone and end up dying. And the marshals who are assigned to court appearances are usually told whether or not the defendant is shackled. In Angelo's situation, some of the marshals didn't know that he was unrestrained because there were no table drapes in the new courthouse. And because some of the marshals didn't know that he was unrestrained, Angelo was able to carry out his daring plan. On Monday, April 21st, 2014, Angelo was in the courtroom as a witness was brought in to testify. According to court docs, the unidentified witness was going to discuss the inner workings of the gang's initiation process. Besides the witness, there were also court marshals, lawyers, and observers like Perry Cardwell, whose mother had been punched during a robbery from the gang a few years before. As the witness took the stand, Angelo, who was unrestrained, took a pen from the table he was sitting at and charged at the witness. He was so determined that he jumped over the witness stand to attack the man testifying as a court marshal shouts, "Drop the pen! Drop the pen out of your hand!" The witness ran away from him, and several people in the court rushed to stop him. But this attempted assault, or murder however you see it, was quickly stopped by a marshal who shot at Angelo 4 times. He suffered chest wounds and was rushed to the hospital where he eventually died. And as for the witness, he tried to attack with the pen. He survived with no injuries. The court marshal was also not publicly named or charged with any wrongdoing for his actions. But that wasn't the end of the case. Angelo's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the marshal and the U.S. Marshal Service. They claimed that the marshal had used excessive force during the incident. As I said, the marshal shot him 4 times in total, and the family felt that it was too much. The case made national headlines, and in 2018, a judge even allowed the shooting video to be released to the public after 4 years. That's right, even though the shooting happened in 2014, the video had not been made public. This was because the U.S. Department of Justice was worried that the Tongan Crips gang would try to retaliate if footage of one of their members being killed hit the airways. But at this point, it was deemed in the interest of public access to judicial records, and according to the family's attorney, Robert Sykes, those last 3 shots were all after he's been shot once down on the ground in the back, and that's the problem I have with this case. There was no necessity to use force, but Judge Dowdle disagreed with this and dismissed the case and said that Angelo was going to attack the witness and had to be stopped with only seconds to spare. Angelo was in custody, but he essentially had escaped custodial control for those seconds during which he was executing his plan to assault the witnesses. His attack was stopped by the shots that Jane Doe rapidly fired in less than 1 1/2 seconds. Since this ruling, the family has chosen not to appeal and the case has pretty much died down. But the Tongan Crips gang continues to operate, and the video lives on in internet infamy. David Paradiso. Imagine for a moment that you were on trial. You're facing years in prison and having your life turned upside down. How do you get out of it? Most likely, you'd do everything to get on the judge's good side. You'd be polite and cooperative and try to get them and the jury to pity you. You should not attack the judge and try to hurt them. Fun fact, that tends not to go down very well. Sadly, our number 3 entry, David Paradiso, didn't get the memo. Despite being on trial for murder of all things, he carried out a bizarre courtroom attack that ended in disaster. Before he achieved infamy for his courtroom behavior, Paradiso got in trouble with the law for allegedly killing his girlfriend Eileen Pelt in December 2006. The two had only been dating for a few weeks and were in the backseat of a car being driven by Paradiso's mother, Deborah. While she has said that she didn't hear any argument beforehand, David stabbed his girlfriend in the neck, killing her. He told prosecutors that he was convinced that she would kill him if he didn't kill her first, for some reason. And what do you do when you kill your girlfriend in your mother's car? If you're David Paradiso, you force her to drive you from Lodi, California to 15 miles away at Amador County, where you dump her body near a road. Does that sound unhinged to you? Well, Paradiso's lawyers felt the same and argued that he was high on meth when he did this. Eventually, of course, he was arrested and charged with murder. It was during his trial in 2009 that things took an even weirder turn. Now, it is important that I explain the lead-up to the trial. Remember Paradiso's mother, Deborah, who he forced to drive to Amador? She was very concerned about his mental state in the weeks before his court appearance. "I think he was having a breakdown. I could see it in his eyes," she said. She was also convinced that he had a weapon of some sort and reported it to the authorities. They searched his holding cell and didn't find any weapons, so this concern was dismissed. Deborah Paradiso says that this contributed to the tragic events that would happen soon after, saying, if they would have listened to him, this wouldn't have happened. And what happened? In March 2009, Paradiso was put on the stand to testify about the murder of his girlfriend. This time, he gave a different account to his previous claims that she was going to kill him. Now, he was saying that he did kill her and that she deserved to die, which was also different from what he had said just the day before. This hearing was being presided over by San Joaquin County Superior Court Judge Cinda Fox, and she had called for a recess after Deborah had left the courtroom upset. She had also been yelling that her son shouldn't be put on the stand because of his mental state, and this caused a disruption. As everyone was leaving for recess, Paradiso walked behind the judge and attacked her. Using an unknown cutting instrument, he stabbed the judge several times and also punched her repeatedly. Several bailiffs tried to intervene, but it was Lodi detective Eric Bradley who drew his gun and shot Paradiso. Judge Fox was taken out of the courtroom in a stretcher, and despite the attack, went on to make a full recovery. David Paradiso, however, died from the gunshot wounds. His mother and brother Deborah and Aaron Paradiso were devastated by the news and reiterated that the incident could have been avoided if law enforcement had acted differently. In an interview, Aaron Paradiso said that his brother was not on drugs, but instead was a paranoid, schizophrenic. "We reported all the mental problems. They were all documented." He told his lawyer he didn't want to go on the stand. "Well, it's over now, right?" he said. Keep in mind that barely 20 minutes before David Paradiso took the stand, the court heard testimony from San Joaquin County Sheriff Sergeant Frank Bosch. Bosch was testifying about another incident where Paradiso got in trouble with the law back in 2005. When the sergeant was called to a local hospital, he was causing a ruckus and making a scene, with wild claims that people were out to get him. Needless to say, David Paradiso's mental health had been in shambles for a long time, even before the courtroom attack. His mother had similar sentiments and expressed frustration with how her son was treated by everyone involved in the case. Just a little while after he was killed, she said, "He jumped up on the thing. He tried to stab the judge. He stabbed her. They shot him in the head and they killed him. They didn't believe he was crazy. Now do they believe he's crazy? What the expletive does it take?" But interestingly, she also said that David might have attacked the judge because he wanted to get killed. He had been having a breakdown, and she thinks that provoking law enforcement to shoot him might have been his way out. David Paradiso's story is a truly tragic one on all sides. First, there was his girlfriend, who was murdered by someone she trusted and left on the side of a road. Judge Fox was also caught in the crossfire and injured while doing her job. There's also David himself, who seemed to have mental health issues way before he became a murderer. His brother and mother are convinced that he had been in a poor mental state in the weeks leading up to the attack, and that his actions were a cry for help. Some are convinced that if mental health was taken more seriously, this now infamous death would not have happened in the first place. Others disagree and think that David was just a violent person all around. Slobodan Praljak. Now, everyone on our list so far was a person who was killed in court by someone else, but this entry is a little different. Slobodan Praljak wasn't killed by a court-martial or a victim's mother, but killed himself in 2017 during his sentencing. Why was Praljak on trial in the first place, and why did he resort to taking his own life? Let's get into it. Slobodan Praljak was a Bosnian Croat born in 1945 in Yugoslavia and initially lived a pretty normal life. He went to university, became a professor, and managed an electronics store. His life was pretty run-of-the-mill until the Croatian War of Independence in 1991. He joined the Croatian Armed Forces and eventually rose to the rank of general and was a pretty big deal during the war. The problem was that he wasn't just leading troops, but allegedly leading them to engage in war crimes. For example, the troops were found to have attacked places of worship, looted buildings, and assaulted people. He was also in charge of the infamous Dretelj camp, where Bosniak men endured a lot of abuse and mistreatment. The war came to an end in 1995. He went back to life as a businessman and did pretty well well at it. He started a production company and a tobacco company and wrote a whopping 25 books. It seemed like Praljak's life was fully back on track, but it wasn't. In the early 2000s, he, along with 5 other people, was accused of war crimes by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY. He surrendered himself to the authorities and was indicted. Some of his charges included grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions, violations of the laws or customs of war, and crimes against humanity. Those were not light charges by any stretch of the imagination, and they mainly stemmed from the fact that he was a high-ranking official during the war. Many of the atrocities were committed by his troops, and it was said that he either ordered the soldiers to do these things or at least knew that they were happening. Speaking of knowing, the ICTY alleged that he knew of some of the war crimes to be carried out before they happened, but did nothing to stop them. The trial began on the 26th of April 2006, and proceedings lasted about 7 years. On the 29th of May 2013, he was found guilty of his charges and sentenced to 7 years in prison. Arguing his innocence, Praljak appealed the decision, and on the 29th of November 2017, a court in Hague upheld some parts of his sentence. He was acquitted of some of his crimes, but the judge decided that his 20-year sentence would still be upheld. Interestingly, he had already served about 13 years in prison, so he had 7 years left, after which he would have been released. But Praljak was not having it. After the judge made the announcement, he declared to the court, as if that wasn't interesting enough, he drank from a little brown bottle he had on him and said, "As you would imagine." The court immediately fell into disarray. The judge ordered that the curtains be drawn, and Praljak was rushed to the hospital, but he didn't make it and was pronounced dead from heart failure. He would not go on to serve the rest of his sentence and left behind a complicated legacy and a lot of questions. First of all, how did he even get access to poison? This is a question that has stumped even the courts. Peter Robinson, a lawyer who has experience in war crime cases, told the BBC that it would be very hard for anyone to smuggle poison to a criminal. Before entering the courtroom, he says everyone goes through 2 security checks, and you can't bring in a bottle of water, much less poison. To this day, no one knows how Praljak got his hands on poison, just that he did. There were also pretty mixed reactions to this death. Some former ICTY judges have said that his death was a tragedy because it deprived victims of the war proper justice. Journalist Almer Obradovic, who was one of the people who suffered in the camps, described Praljak's actions as that of a coward. Ouch. But there are some people in Praljak's home country that see him as a hero. In Praljak's native city of Herzegovina, several evening masses were held for him, and in Mostar Square, over 1,000 people came out to hold a candlelight vigil in his honor. Perhaps the biggest tribute came from then Croatian President Kolinda Grabar-Kitarovic, who described Praljak as a man who preferred to give his life rather than to live, having been convicted of crimes he firmly believed he had not committed. His act struck deeply at the heart of the Croatian people and left the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia with the weight of eternal doubt about the accomplishment of its tasks. To this day, there are people who see Praljak as a criminal and those who think he's a hero. Regardless of opinion, he will go down in history as a man who took his life in full view of the court rather than accept his conviction. Michael Marin. The story of Michael Marin is a truly bizarre one from start to finish and has all the makings of a Hollywood blockbuster. From the beginning, Michael Marin seemed to have it all. He had a degree from Brigham Young University and a law degree from Yale. After school, he began a career in Wall Street and worked for some of the biggest names like Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch, and Salomon Brothers. Working for such industry heavyweights meant that Michael was making a lot of money, and boy, did he know how to spend it. Not only did he have several luxury homes, but he also collected art pieces from the likes of Picasso. He travels the world, and fun fact, even climbed Mount Everest in the early 2000s. He had a wife and 4 children and appeared to be living the dream, a very expensive dream. The trouble started when Michael fell behind on his mortgage payments for his $2.55 million mansion in Phoenix, Arizona. He tried several ways to save his home, including raffling it through a charity fundraiser. None of this worked, and he got increasingly desperate. It is this desperation that led to his truly bizarre crime. Picture it, Michael Marin's house is on fire and coming down fast. Amidst the chaos, he emerges from the flames in scuba gear? Huh? As insane as this sounds, this actually happened. When authorities were called to the scene of the fire, they found the former Wall Street broker more dressed for a day at sea than escaping a burning building. But there was a reason for this ridiculous getup. Remember when I said that Marin was struggling to keep up with his mortgage payments? Well, that wasn't the only money issue he was dealing with. It was later revealed that Marin owed $17,250 on the Phoenix house and had an upcoming balloon payment of $2.3 million. He also had a monthly mortgage payment of $2,000 $2,500 on another home and owed $34,000 in taxes. Just a year before the fire, he had over $900,000 in his bank account, but this had dwindled to just $50. He was drowning financially and decided that burning down the Phoenix house would be a way out. On paper, the plan seemed simple enough. Burn the house down, escape wearing scuba gear so you can breathe, collect the insurance money, and you're home free. He was wrong, and there were a few things that put a dent in his plan. First, wasn't it awfully convenient that he just happened to have a scuba suit set up and ready to go once the fire started? Who keeps a scuba suit just set up in their bedroom? And once the fire was investigated, it was found that someone had started it in 4 different places around the house and used phone books to make sure it spread. Now, it's one thing to owe a lot of money, but it's another to be charged with arson and attempted insurance fraud. For anyone who doesn't know, the two are very big offenses, and the punishment for them is not light. When Marin's court proceedings started on May 21, 2012, he faced 7 to 21 years in prison if he was found guilty. It was a disaster. In the beginning, he was broke and facing foreclosure of his house. Now he was facing years in prison and was still broke. The walls were closing in on him, and he needed to act fast. Then, on June 28, 2012, the 53-year-old was found guilty of his charges. He was devastated by the verdict, and in the official court video, he can be seen putting his face in his hands. He appears to swallow something and his face starts turning red. Soon after, he takes a drink from a sports bottle and collapses. He convulses as panicked members of the court scramble to help him, but he couldn't be saved. After being rushed to the hospital, he was pronounced dead. After going to such extreme lengths to save his home, his life had come to an end. Naturally, there were investigations into how and why he took his own life, and a few things came to light. First, he had bought cyanide powder online in 2011, just before his trial began, and investigators speculate that he made cyanide capsules to use if the case didn't go his way. And then there was the email. Shortly after he died, his son received a pre-scheduled email from his father's account. The email had instructions on what to do if he was found guilty, where his will was, as well as how to find his car. It was a tragic story all around. Michael Morano had risen to the top of his field and was living the life of an eccentric millionaire with his lavish houses, overseas trips, and thrill-seeking adventures. Once his financial woes caught up with him, he concocted a bizarre plan to save face, but only ended up in trouble with the law. And when the hammer of justice came down, he chose to end his life in court. Some people see Morano as a greedy man who lived above his means and turned to crime, while others are a bit more sympathetic to his situation. His story continues to attract international attention even over a decade after his death. No one wants to find themselves in court, facing the possibility of jail or worse. But the people on our list got to escape their sentences, sort of. Some were put down by their own hands, while others not so much. Whether it was a victim's mother seeking revenge, taking their own life after declaring innocence, or someone who had met the end of their road, all the people on our list died in the courtroom. Want to see more of the craziest things that happened in court? Click the card on your scene and get watching.